Hello and welcome back for another historic video. Today we'll be taking a look at this mono red Ruby Storm deck. The deck wants to utilize the namesake card, Ruby Medallion, to reduce our red spells by 1, and then we can also use Monsoon Mage to do a similar effect. This one only reduces our instant and sorcery spells though, and then in addition to that, whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, we flip a coin. If we lose the flip, Ral deals 1 damage to us, but if we win the flip, we can exile him and return him to the battlefield as the Planeswalker side. Ideally, we want to do this after having already cast 6 instant or sorcery spells. That way Ral comes in with enough loyalty to immediately be able to ultimate. And what the Leyline Prodigy does is we can use his plus ability to grant the cost reduction on instant and sorcery spells. We probably will never use the -2 ability of dealing 2 damage to 1 or 2 targets, but the ultimate ability of exiling the top 8 cards of our library and being able to cast the instant and sorcery spells from among them without paying their mana costs is the big payoff for this card. To combo with our cost reducers, we have 2 cards that generate mana for us in the form of Runaway Steamkin, which whenever we cast a red spell, if it has fewer than 3 counters, we can put a counter on it. And then by removing 3 counters, we can add 3 red mana. So when we reduce our 2 drops down to 1 mana, and then paired in conjunction with this card, it will essentially make our 2 drops free. Similar, Birgi, God of Storytelling, whenever we cast any spell, we get to add 1 red mana. And then its other abilities we're not really going to use, which is not losing mana at the end of steps and phases, and we don't have any creatures in our deck with Post. Occasionally, if we already have a Birgi on the battlefield, we'll also play out the Harnfell, Horn of Bounty, which we can discard a card and then exile the top 2 cards of our library, and we can play those cards until end of turn. So if we have extra lands in our hand or redundant copies of a cost reducer, then we can use the Horn to cycle into some better cards. When it comes to winning the game, we have 2 win conditions. The first is Grape Shot, which is a 2 mana sorcery, and it deals 1 damage to any target, and then it has Storm. So as we're cycling through our deck, we'll be building the Storm count by casting spells, and then if we get high enough, we can use the Grape Shot to kill our opponent. We have a single copy of Underworld Breach in the deck as well. So as we're casting cards to cycle through our deck, they'll go into our graveyard, and then we can exile 3 of those cards, and then potentially recur the Grape Shot over and over again, or we can use it just as a value card to continue to cycle. And lastly, we have 4 copies of Unstable Amulet. This 2 mana artifact gives us 2 energy when it comes into play, and then whenever we cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, it will deal 1 damage to each opponent, which is our primary win condition. When we're cycling through our deck, all of the cards go to exile before we cast them, and so each time we cast a card, this will deal 1 damage to our opponent. If we have multiple amulets in play, then each card we cast will deal additional damage as well. And then the Unstable Amulet comes with a tap ability, which lets us exile the top card of our library, and we can play it until we exile another card with this artifact. So it essentially replaces itself the same turn that it is played. Then to cycle through our deck, we have 16 cards with similar abilities here. The Reckless Impulse 2 mana sorcery lets us exile the top 2 cards of our library, and then we can play them until the end of our next turn. Similar effect is the Wren's Resolve, doing the same thing. Questing Druid has an adventure ability called Seek the Beast, which is a 2 mana instant, which is a similar effect to both the Impulse and the Resolve. And then we can also cast the Questing Druid as a creature, and whenever we cast a spell that is red, we get to put a 1/1 counter on it. Occasionally, we can try and use the Questing Druid either to wall one of our opponent's creatures or to attack for combat damage if needed, but that doesn't come up very often. And then the last card we have to cycle through our deck is Rob the Archives, a 2 mana sorcery that lets us exile the top 2 cards, and those cards have to be played the same turn that this is cast. And this also has Casualty 1, meaning we can sacrifice a creature with power 1 or greater, and we get to copy the spell, essentially flipping over 4 cards. So it is a good way to dig for additional action once we get going. And if we have redundant cost reducers, such as a Steamkin and a Birgi, we don't mind sacrificing the Steamkin. The Questing Druid can also be sacrificed to this ability. We also have 3 copies of Glimpse the Impossible, which at 3 mana is the weakest of the cycling effects. It lets us exile the top 3 cards of our library, and these cards have to be played this turn. At the beginning of our end step, if we did not play any of them, we get to create a spawn token that sacrifices for a generic mana pip. Then for the mana base, we have 3 copies of Strike It Rich, which can help us ramp into a turn 2 or turn 3 play by creating a treasure on turn 1. And then it also has Flashback, acting as a second spell that can be cast and trigger the amulet. And then for the mana, we're running 16 lands total, 12 mountains, and 4 Prismatic Vista. The Prismatic Vista are good because they help thin the mountains out of the deck so that once we start comboing, we're less likely to hit a land card, which is one of the ways that this deck can fizzle. Usually, players familiar with this deck will just concede once you start to combo off. Even though the combo is not deterministic, there is a chance that it fizzles, but usually you are able to find a win condition and beat your opponent. Before we jump into the gameplay, I'd like to ask you to please like and subscribe the video. It really helps the channel. And without further ado, let's jump into the games. This hand has a reducer and a mana generator. They are both the weaker of the 2 of those effects. I think it's a mulligan. This is better. And we will put back 1 of the medallions. Up against Eldrazi. We'll use our fetch land first. We already have 3 lands, so we don't really want to draw any more. So every little bit of thinning helps. Amulet is a okay draw. We're really looking for a mana generator now. Steamkin counts. So we'll start with the Steamkin. Then play out an amulet. Another medallion, not what we're looking for. And we don't need to flip the second one since we have no more mana and no more land drops. So we'll keep that card a secret until next turn. I think if we dodge here, we have a good chance of comboing off. Michael Spawn is not going to do it. Now we just need to not fizzle when we start our combo. We'll hold our land drop, try and play a fetch land if we flip one. There is a fetch land, so we'll play that first. Now every card we play for 1 mana pip is essentially free.
Chance of storms today? 100%.
We'll sacrifice our Ral to flip 4 cards. There's a Birgi. That should be the win here. So we'll play out Birgi first. Then we'll glimpse. This is free as well. Another Steamkin means we'll be able to play out the other medallion. And so here again, we're just trying to continue to draw cards that will allow us to flip more off the top of our deck. And our opponent concedes. Not deterministic, but there's a very high probability that we win from here. Here we are missing a cost reducer. We do have some acceleration out into Birgi. We'll give it a try. Our opponent is on a Luris deck, so it could be a combo deck on the opponent's side. Either Val, could be Energy. This is pointing towards Energy. The Ruby Medallion was a great top deck. Next turn we can play out Birgi and then immediately start the combo. So we're just trying to dodge Static Prison. It is actually the Val combo, not the Energy deck, so my opponent tricked me. We'll be able to look at 5 cards here before fizzling. And we will be able to wipe their board either way. Alright, draw spells, so we'll keep it going. I think here we play out our Rowl. And then we sacrifice it to rob the archives. Look at 4 more cards. We'll get the amulet down. Steamkin is a good pickup. This will allow us to play some of these 2 mana cards more efficiently. And then I think we start with probably Glimpse the Impossible. This sees the most cards, and Double Strike It Rich should set us free now. And our opponent concedes. Good game. This hand needs lands, but it does have a Ruby Medallion and a mana generator. We'll keep it. Strike It Rich means we will be able to play out our Medallion on turn 2 regardless. We do miss our first land drop. If our opponent is on a fair creature deck, we have time to set up. So here we can either play out the Steamkin, or we can dig for a land with the Impulse. I think we dig for the land. We are rewarded, and then here we'll play out the Steamkin. Steamkin does require a critical mass of cards before it can go infinite, so the earlier you can get it down, the better. Our opponent with one of the new Lorien cards, Vibrance, evoked to draw a fetch land. So it looks like our opponent is going to try and recur these fetch lands out of their graveyard. They warp in a Quantum Riddler. Do they offer up Cobra for a trade? They do not. Now if we had another land here, Birgi would win it. We'll use our Impulse since it's going to disappear. And then here we actually can continue the chain because we'll be able to get Steamkin up to 3 counters. And I think this is going to be a victory. So we'll get Birgi down first. Now this will essentially generate 2 mana every time we play a card. Flip over another amulet. And if our opponent is familiar with this deck, they are likely to concede soon. Right, so here we will strike it rich. Then we can play out our questing druid. This will help it start scaling. We will glimpse. And our opponent concedes. This hand only has a mana generator, no cost reducer. It has to be a mulligan. This one's not much better. We'll keep this one and we'll throw back both of the amulets. There are redundant win conditions in the deck, and so digging for cards is more important. Here we'll start with the Medallion, make all of our future plays better. Looks like our opponent is on some form of combo deck. Could be Neoform. Impulse. A land off the top next turn would be great. It is Neoform. Here we get the option of playing out one of these. I think we will just play out the Birgi. If our opponent has it next turn, there's nothing we can do about it. And missing the land drop means we can't attempt the combo here. Our opponent is still digging for their combo pieces. Shock in means they most likely have another counter spell. Will they aim it at the Wren's Resolve? They do not. Since we're trying to combo here on this turn, we will wait for a fetch land before playing out our land drop. We'll try and get our opponent to concede. We don't even need to pay for the Spell Pierce. We'll try declining it. I think having more mana would allow us to combo better, although here, if we brick, I'm going to be very disappointed. And we do in fact brick. Wow. That is a lot of land cards. We're only running 16 lands in the whole deck. We drew 8 of them in the top 20. That is unfortunate. Well, that's Magic. Sometimes you hit some variants. Now they're going to use Neoform. They're going to copy it twice, sacrificing the Seagate. Then they will fetch up Dualcaster Mage and Glasspool Mimic and copy the Dualcaster Mages. And then eventually they'll get a Haste Enabler and swing for lethal. This hand is missing a mana generator, but it does have the Ruby Medallion. Hard to throw back a hand that has good mana and Ruby Medallion. Second Ruby Medallion, not what we want to see. We could try to combo off here, but since our opponent is holding up interaction, we'll just play out another Medallion and pass. No play from our opponent. We'll seek the beast. Here we don't mind playing out Ral as a sacrificial card to take some of their removal out. Our opponent going to discard. They get rid of a Fanatic Offering. So they will have creatures in their deck that they'll be looking to play out. Play out the Ral.
Just a rain mage, nothing to see
I think we can do at least one Reckless Impulse. Again, these cards are playable until the end of the next turn. And our opponent has tapped out, so we can actually try and attempt the win here. So we'll play out Birgi and start the chain. Steamkin is a great top deck. Play out another Steamkin. We can sacrifice the second one to rob the archives, and our opponent concedes. This hand has a couple cost reducers. We do need to dig for a mana generator. Rakdos deck from our opponent. And now we have both of our win conditions in our hand with the Underworld Breach and Grape Shot, so we're looking to dodge discard on both of them. Our opponent on the Persist combo deck. They can win next turn already. And without the mana generator, we are just going to lose this game.
Chance of storms today? 100%.
I want to take a minute to talk about why the Persist combo deck is such a problem for the health of the meta in Historic. So the deck is consistently able to combo off on turn 3, and a lot of the times it's even able to combo off on turn 2, either using Faithless Looting or Otherworldly Gaze to get the Scholar of the Lost Trove or Conspiracy Unraveler into the graveyard. And what that means, if you're trying to combat this strategy, is that you need to run a lot of main deck graveyard hate, and it has to be 0 mana or 1 mana cards, because you need to be able to play it on your first turn if you're on the draw in order to prevent your opponent from comboing off. Now, in order to have these in your opening hand, you need to play a large number of them. I think if you are running a 60 card deck and you have 12 copies of a card in your deck, you'll have about an 80% chance of having it in a 7-card hand. You would need to run around 16 to have it 90% of the time. So you would need to dedicate a huge portion of your deck to stopping the combo. Now you say, well, I could also run things like discard or counter magic, which is true, does have the potential to disrupt what your opponent is doing. But since their deck is primarily just card draw and discard outside of their combo, even if you Thoughtseize on turn 1 and take away their persist, they're very likely to draw into another one early in their deck. Again, they're running 8 copies between persist and life death. So it means if you want any chance of winning against the deck, you have to overly skew your cards towards graveyard hate. And then that leaves you susceptible to other combo decks that people play in Historic, such as the Minion of the Mighty deck, which doesn't use the graveyard at all, which means that all your graveyard cards would be dead cards. And at the same time, if you wanted to be able to stop that deck from comboing off on turn 2, you need to run 12 to 16 turn 1 removal spells that you can use on their minion. Right there, that essentially eats up almost your entire deck. If you're running 20, 24 lands, that only leaves a few slots open for a win condition or a strategy of your own. I've learned from tracking my own games that if you don't play any graveyard hate in your deck, then you'll end up matching up about 30% of the time up against the persist combo deck. Similarly, if you're not playing any turn 1 removal in your deck, then around 30% of the time you will match up against the Minion of the Mighty deck, which in both cases, due to the numbers, it seems like Magic the Gathering Arena is deliberately matching you up against these combos, because if you switch decks to something that does have hate in it, then those numbers do drop immediately. But that kind of pigeonholes you into playing a few limited decks that are able to combat it, or you have to become the villain and play those decks yourself if you want any chance of winning. Let me know in the comments how you feel about this, if you've experienced similar things on your end, and what you do to combat it in deck building, or whether you just concede in one of these matches and move on to the next. This hand is okay. We will be searching for a mana producer. Birgi off the top is great. We'll start on the regular mountain. We do want to draw into one more land. Our opponent looks like they could be on an affinity deck. And we do find our mountain. We'll fetch to thin the deck a bit and play out our Ruby Medallion. Our opponent does get to draw a card here, but next turn we can try and combo off for the win if our opponent doesn't have any interaction. So here they tap out, which means we are clear to go, and Ren's Resolve is a great top deck. So we'll start off with both of the amulets. We'll see what they flip over first. Questing Druid for the first one. Another amulet. So this should kill our opponent pretty quickly. See what the second one flips. Steamkin. Not a bad draw. And then a Reckless Impulse. Don't need to play out Rao yet. And our opponent concedes. This is a good hand. It has both the Medallion and the Birgi. A Skill Diver from our opponent. We'll start off on a mountain and pass. Could be a poison deck. or they could just be using it for death touch. Rot Priest definitely points towards poison. And they already have a target spell. We're up to 3 poison here. We will need a 3rd land to try and combo off next turn. Opponent tutoring up a Fangbear. We do hit the land. With 3 draw cards in hand already, I think we have a very high chance of succeeding here. That's 1 spell. Strike of Riches 2. Seek the Beast is 3. Rend Resolve is 4. Can play out the Harful Horn of Bounty here. Strike at Rich is 5. Strike at Rich is 6. So we can transform the Row here. Exile 8 cards.
You're about to be. I'd explain the science.
Here we can play out some of our questing druids just to get them scaling. We can also sacrifice them to casualty if needed. Just digging for a way to deal damage to our opponent here. We're about halfway through our deck. Sacrifice one of the Steamkin. And there is an amulet, so we can start dealing damage to our opponent. We're at a point now where we don't need to really take the tokens off the Steamkin. We have unlimited mana. And there is our Grape Shot, so that should do it. Just target our opponent. Good game. That does it for today's gameplay. This deck is very satisfying to play once it starts to combo off. It does struggle with some of the busted decks in the meta, such as the Persist combo deck, the Val combo deck, and Minion of the Mighty decks. So if you're okay with just conceding against those decks, then this can be a very fun way to grind out some wins. There's a very clear difference in power level in hands that have the Ruby Medallion and the Birgi, as opposed to the Ral and the Runaway Steamkin. The Ruby Medallion being harder to interact with than the creatures means that you're more likely to be able to combo off, and also reducing cards like your Impulse and Resolve on the following turns means that you are more easily able to search for your Birgis and your Steamkins to get the combo going. We were able to get some wins on turn 3 using the Medallion and the Birgi. When it comes to improving this deck, I don't think the cards have been printed yet in Arena, or they're not legal in Historic, but the Legacy version of the Ruby Storm doesn't have cards such as Birgi and Steamkin. Instead, it relies on instants and sorceries that generate mana, such as Rite of Flame, Desperate Ritual, Manamorphose, and Sealing Song. So I definitely look forward to updating the deck and playing the stronger version once the cards are finally ported over. In the meantime, I think this is probably the best we can do. You might be able to swap out Glimpse the Impossible for more card draw or a way to protect your creatures. We did not come up against many counter strategies, in which case you might look at the Sculpture, which was recently printed. Potentially you could put in a couple burn spells to deal with your opponent's small creatures. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any red spells that act as graveyard hate that you can play on turn 1. And I don't know if you want to put in the colorless artifacts such as Grafdigger's Cage, as those do not help you when you're comboing. While the deck is fun to play against most decks in the current combo heavy meta, it's hard to recommend this competitively. As always, I'd like to thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe for more content.